and welcome to the 905 podcast with me, Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
And our Thursday 905 roundup is happening on Tuesday this week. So welcome to that. And Joel, you superstar regional journalist, you've had your third op-ed in the Spectator this week, which was and for good reason. Why don't we kick off talking about that a bit and what how that came about?
Kudos to the Spectator for taking another risk with me, I guess, if you will. I wanted to publish my rantings, but it started off with a casual discussion between my wife and I about the vaccine hesitancy that still exists in the province, and we were wondering why is it, aside from why would anybody still be hesitant after the hundreds of millions, billions of doses worldwide that have been taken for the vaccine and all this stuff. We thought it might be a matter of just rephrasing the conversation a bit, and we kind of came to the conclusion of maybe the discussion is all wrong. Instead of just saying, hey, you need to take the vaccine because it's going to save your life. It's not about a personal decision. We need to rephrase it as a social responsibility. And we came up with the idea of, and I put this to basically in the opinion piece, was that why not treat the vaccine program like we did with re-educating people on drunk driving. And the summary was, and we'll put a link to the op-ed for you to read, so you can read exactly what I said. But my opinion was basically, a generation ago or two generations ago, it was commonly thought of, if you went out partying with your friends at a restaurant or at somebody's house and you had one too many to drink and you decided to get behind the wheel of a car, it was thought of, well, that's your responsibility. That's your bad decision, not something you shouldn't do, but that's up to you. I can't stop you from doing it. And, that was kind of the social norm for a while, until the damage that was caused by drunk drivers, killing innocent families, doing damage to people who had no say in their decision whatsoever, got to be too much. And finally, you had organizations like MAD and public awareness campaigns to re-educate the public on the dangers of drunk driving. So now today, flash forward to today, the idea of going out, having too much to drink and driving home is, you'd be considered a social pariah. It's commonplace now to consider it a social responsibility that if you're going to drink while you're out and celebrating, you'll have somebody be a designated driver, or you'll find an alternative third party to take you home. And I said, why can we take that principle and apply it to the vaccination program and say, this isn't a personal responsibility. The idea isn't like, okay, you want to get vaccinated, fine, don't, I do, we'll leave it at that. It's no, I didn't get vaccinated because I care about myself, I do. But I do it because I care about my family, my friends, my loved ones, and honestly, for the people I have no idea who they are, the strangers down the street when I walk, when I go out. And that's the key, is to reframe getting vaccinated not as a personal responsibility, but as a social responsibility. And I put it out there just to kind of spark a discussion to say, like, we still have 15 or 20% of the population not vaccinated, and they're holding us back from kind of re-engaging fully in their, not just socially, but like also economically. We have so many restaurants and small businesses that just want to open and do commerce and all that stuff. But there's this 15, 20% people are they're holding us back.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good point and a new angle on the discussion, because it's all very well to just get angry at people, but there also has to be an element of why is it this way, and then what can we do to change it? Really has to be involved in it, any discussion of public policy and things like that. But it's a good point. It's like, when I was growing up, particularly in Europe, smoking was tolerated anywhere. And the idea of stopping people from smoking anywhere was this outrageous imposition. And it's like, no, but you're killing people. But there were, like with the drink driving, there were these huge public campaigns and publicity campaigns and public service announcements and the rest of it that got that messaging across. And we've had PSAs, and we see the Ontario government and the federal government running ads, but they're not that kind of. That's not the messaging. They're kind of like, yeah, get your vaccine. They're not like, do this because it's not just about you. And I think that is an angle that has not been kind of hit on powerfully enough.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I think the majority, those of us who did get the vaccine, and we are the majority, either we did it because we were feeling the pressure of, I don't want to be excluded. I want to be with everybody else when we go out. Two, a lot of us read the science and okay, they're safe to use. They're safe to use. The how they developed them and tested them, and yeah, there was a priority. I mean, this is a global pandemic. Of course, they're going to run this through, put this to the top of the list to get approved. And then on a global level, we have millions and billions of people getting inoculated that they are vaccinated, that they, there's no mass death or mass illness. These fears have not come to light. And there's a question of, okay, so how are we going to be able to convince people? I don't think through browbeating them, but if you phrase it as like, this isn't a personal choice. You're doing this not for yourself. You're doing this for your loved ones. You're doing this for your children, your grandparents, your friends and family. And I followed it up with saying, the vaccine passport program is a key part of that. I'm glad to see that a number of restaurants that were anti-passport in Hamilton that have since been forced to close down, and they're under investigation by the Ministry of Labor for violating vaccine passport guidelines, rules, laws, whatever you want to call them. And I'm glad to see that because, again, in the opinion piece I wrote, this isn't anything new. We have liquor laws here, and I know this for a fact. I used to run a restaurant that was licensed. And yeah, I was told, yeah, I can't serve underage people. If I got caught, I would lose my license. I can't serve anyone past the point of intoxication. I would lose my license. And then if somebody was intoxicated and they decided to drive home from my establishment, if they traced it back to my establishment, I could have been in deep trouble. So to say, oh, well, this is a government overreach and it's tyranny. It's not. We have these laws on the books and they are enforced. It's
infuriating that such a weak argument has managed to take hold. So, obviously it hasn't taken hold with the vast majority of people, but it's taken hold with a small but powerful minority. I mean, not powerful, but 20% is a significant enough minority that it's an irritation. And yeah, it's like we live in a society surrounded by constraints on our freedoms that we have to have because otherwise people die, that have developed over centuries and centuries and centuries. We used to put lead in bread. We stopped doing that a while ago because we found that lead isn't such a great thing to be putting in bread. That's a dumb example, but
well, no, it's not. We have the laws that we have mostly because somebody said, well, if we don't, somebody will do that. Yeah. Somebody will sell you rancid meat at the supermarket if we don't have health inspectors. Somebody will let bacteria grow in restaurants or in places that we rely on to be sterile and clean. If we don't have people going in and inspecting and saying, no, you broke the rules. Here's your fine. We're shutting you down. We don't bat an eye at that. Like we don't say, oh, that's their choice. That's my choice. It's the free market. We have to, no, like this is, we used to close, public pools because of polio outbreaks in the 50s. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. This isn't anything new, people. This isn't like an infringement on your freedoms. It's public health, emphasis on the public.
Your freedom, no individual freedom has ever been allowed to trump the freedoms of everybody else. That's really all it is, isn't it? So it's like, you're free right up until the minute that your freedom causes someone else to be ill or unwell or unfree. At that point, you have to give it up and compromise. It's irritating that we're even having these discussions because they're so juvenile, really, on the kind of level of this is what you should learn kind of the first day at school, the same day that you go to school and your teacher says, this is your chair, this is the place you put your bag and you keep your stuff. You're not allowed to go putting your hands in other people's stuff. These are the rules that you have to live by. It's the most bizarre thing that the intelligent people are feeling the need to kind of justify why we have things in place that are designed to benefit the majority by minor infringements on the freedoms of all of us, and it's not an infringement on freedoms anyway. I mean, it's you don't do dumb things so that we can all get along well. It's such a simple thing.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I do think the point about the really, I mean, I expect, if we leave it long enough, how these things will get sorted out is that the insurance companies will do what insurance companies do, and you say, the people who it won't necessarily be the people who refuse to take vaccines who kind of bear the brunt. It will be the businesses who, certainly if they're businesses that are refusing to implement the rules.
Eventually, the insurance companies will say, we're not going to give companies health insurance if the majority of your staff are not vaccinated. There will be questions of, you won't be able to leave the country. You won't be able to get insurance to leave the country, for health insurance, if you're unvaccinated, or if you get COVID, we're not covering it for you. You're right. The insurance companies will be if you really want to get the private sector involved, that's where it's going to be. And they don't care about the research you did on your own. They don't care about that YouTube video you saw. They have talked to the scientists and the doctors, and they've crunched the numbers, and they said, you're more of that 20%, that 15-20%, you're more of a liability to us than the rest of us who got a shot. So they'll say, no, don't need money from you. I mean, we could go down that road. It'll take longer to go there, but I think, I'm very happy that the vaccine passports are here. I think they work, and I'm glad that we're starting to see them being enforced, that the Ministry of Labor is stepping into go to these restaurants and saying, no, this is no different than you serving a minor a cocktail or getting somebody drunk beyond far beyond the point of intoxication and then sending them on their merry way. You have a responsibility to your patrons. You have a responsibility to the public. If you're going to be a public gathering place, that's all there is to it.
Yeah. And actually, just a final point on this, or a final note on this point, is that touches upon something that we were just discussing between the two of us last week, which is the enforcement has to be there from the government and from the government agencies, because without that, society, Twitter, the Twitter sphere will take the law into their own hands and perhaps rightly, perhaps wrongly, say, hey, this place isn't enforcing. Now, the thing, that's fine, but the problem with that is, says who? On what basis? Where's the evidence? You got to do it properly, otherwise you're verging on witch hunts, So that's why it's so important, and why it's so frustrating that the province has been always like a month behind, 2 months behind, doing it at the last minute, when they don't really want to, because into that void falls either rumor and innuendo, or we're waiting a year for the insurance industry to catch up on something that the province could have done already. And like you say, the insurance industry will be a lot less well, they won't be they won't mess around. They're like, okay, you're out of business, go away. So this is such a disappointing provincial government. I mean, not so disappointing for me. I expected exactly this, but for a government that always and for a premier that always prided himself on this, I'm going to deal with things and I won't be messed around. He's such a wuss. He really is. It's like, just get on with it, Doug. Get on with it, for Pete's sake. Anyway.
He will eventually. It just takes him forever to get there.
He just gets forced into it. Yeah.
The other topic we wanted to talk about tonight was, actually, it's a topic we talked about a little while back. And on September 30th for National Truth and Reconciliation Day, we reposted the links to it on our social media But we talked about the Haldimand Tract in Ontario. It's just outside the 905, not technically 905 region, but we border it and it does impact us. So we wanted to talk about it again tonight. And Roland, I'll throw it over to you. What's going on there with the Haldimand Tract, Six Nations, and the community of Norfolk County?
Yeah, well, listeners will probably remember that the 1492 land back lane dispute has kind of gone away just because the developer just withdrew their intent to develop, and just so it's that particular story within the larger story of the whole Haldimand Tract is currently resolved, or in abeyance anyway, let's put it that way. However, the latest one is that some lands in Norfolk County, about 40 acres of farmland that belongs to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Chiefs Council, is now at dispute because Norfolk County is planning to kick the Confederacy Chiefs off the land, claiming that they haven't been paying taxes. Now, the dispute is that as far as the Haudenosaunee Chiefs Council are concerned, they don't need to pay taxes because they're First Nations and it's unceded land. And the Norfolk County sees it differently, that they're owed something like $300,000 for no, actually, apologies, that's not the right amount. They're owed $23,000 in back taxes for the property, which. So, I mean, this relates to the declaration last year that basically by the Six Nations of the Grand River that there would be a moratorium on development in the Haldimand Tract unless people kind of spoke to them first. And that sounds, it may sound like I'm describing an ultimatum there, but I don't actually think it is, because if you read the nature of the declaration, if you read the nature of the things that the has been said about the Haldimand Tract, it's not the First Nations people or the Haudenosaunee chiefs who are using the kind of extreme language here, but they are saying, "Hey, we've got a claim here, and we would really appreciate it if people kind of speak to us before just going ahead and pretending we don't exist." Now,
well, I was just going to say that this is, I am fascinated by the story because when we had we spoke about it last time, the question was like, well, what does a moratorium? And this is a large chunk of land, people. This is like the thing of the Grand River, and I believe there's 6 miles on either side of the Grand River, and that is the Haldimand Tract. We're talking communities like Norfolk County, but also Brantford, Kitchener-Waterloo, Cambridge. A large part of the province is covered by this Haldimand Tract. So to say no more development, I thought, well, how's that going to look? And is that enforceable? It turns out it might be. This, and quite frankly, I'm beginning to think that this might be what nation-to-nation discussions look like going forward. We recently had the National Truth and Reconciliation Day, and some people don't take it seriously. This might be the change. This might be the mark of a changing of the guard, so to speak. We gotta. It can't just be business as usual.
Yeah, and I think we've used that phrase, and it's certainly a phrase used by First Nations peoples in Ontario of that nation-to-nation communication, and I think that has to be a message that gets through. The whole history of the Haldimand Tract is not it's not nothing. I mean, these are well documented legal disputes that go back hundreds of years, and to sort of simply pretend that it doesn't exist, which is kind of what this is very much municipal legal departments doing what municipal legal departments do, which is defend every right that the municipality has to the letter of the law, come hell or high water. But it's particularly unhelpful kind of attitude to have in this current environment. But these disputes are going to keep on going on. And I think it's fairly clear that the Six Nations are going to keep on being just as aggressive or decisive in trying to pursue their rights as anybody else was until there is that kind of overall.
It should be pointed out though that in the spec article where we read this, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy isn't saying no. There's no way. There's no get off our land. It's no. Come talk to us first. I'm from what I get is the hand has been offered. The door has been opened as a gesture of good faith. Come and sit down. Let's talk about this first. They're not giving up claim to the land. That is clear. I don't see why they should. It's part of. It should be clarified that this land in particular is part of the development fund for the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. That they do plan to use this to develop it into some. I think right now they said it was used for agrarian purposes, farming and the like. But who knows what that might change down the road? It might turn into a profitable bit of land for them. Good for them. Whatever they want to do with it, that's their right, as long as it's legal, of course. What gets me is that it's we just had the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. It just seems that there's such a divide between the realities of what reconciliation looks like for Canada, Ontario, the various municipalities around the province, and the First Nations people of this land. There's still that huge gap, and I find this might getting a little bit out of our wheel well here, but there's something about September 30th. Justin Trudeau goes missing on that day. The Prime Minister of the country goes missing. Turns out he went on a vacation to Tofino, BC with his family on a day that had a lot of significance, not just to the First Nations people, but honestly to white people as well. We needed, there's this gulf of how do we reconcile the history of this country with the future we want to have. And we need leadership on this. We're not getting at the provincial level. That is abundantly clear right now. We're not getting at the provincial level. So we turned to our federal leaders and they were absent. And we need, as white Canada, settler Canada, we needed that example of this is how we move forward. This is serious. We need to act in good faith. And he wasn't there. Now that's a very high level analysis, but I mean, it trickles down because this is reconciliation on the ground. This is reconciliation happening on the ground and this is what it is. This isn't some like hoity-toity, oh, we're sorry. Let's have a ceremony and sing O Canada and Kumbaya and we'll walk away. This is what reconciliation is actually on the ground and this is where we need to get into the mud, so to speak, and solve these issues.
Yeah. It's not enough to wear an orange t-shirt, particularly if you haven't even paid attention to who you were buying that orange t-shirt from. Or what it said on the front. That's another story. But this in most things in life, I kind of like to see a ground up approach, grassroots collaboration. But this, when we're talking about people who do not recognize, who have never been a part of the Canadian nation state in a formal sense because they pre-exist it, and the Canadian nation state. If I stop banging my microphone for a few minutes, it has to come from the top. And it was spectacularly unhelpful for the Prime Minister to do anything other than use this first statutory Truth and Reconciliation Day as kind of a very hard-working day to be visibly demonstrating his commitment to truth and reconciliation. Now, it was this government, or before the election, that passed the law that made this a statutory holiday. Sure, it'll be nice when the provinces catch up, but it's just like, who was advising him? And then when the First Nations community groups from Kamloops, and apologies that I'm blanking on the proper names here, but from the initial place where the first bodies were found in Kamloops, when they twice reached out to the Prime Minister, I dare say that message never got to him, and it was weeded out by staff because that's how things work. But what kind of ship are you running if somewhere online someone says, oh, those guys, we need to pay attention to emails from those guys? And actually that would be a fantastic idea for the Prime Minister to go and the very first statutory holiday for Truth and Reconciliation to be there, and then you don't even reply. I mean, you and I know how politics works, and the do not reply
it's a shame, and that it's just why are we picking on Trudeau right now? Well, A, he deserves it. Two, it trickles down. Like, leadership matters. The behavior of your leaders matter, and especially in what is I think will prove to be the challenge of a generation is how does reconciliation between centuries of racism and genocide against the First Nations people of this country. How do we? Because we know, like, white Canada, settler Canada is not going anywhere. I have nowhere else to go. I was born here. I have nowhere else to go. I'm not moving, but I'm not. We need to find a way to live together. And the thing, like, I've always wondered, I don't know what that path forward is. And I turn to my leaders to show me that path. And when they fail to do it, what happens is people give up on it. People give up on it because they say, well, Jesus, it's too much for him to do. Well, why am I going to worry about it? Okay, forget it. I'll go back to what I normally do, which is, I'm just going to take this land, this tract of land that, you've held it for centuries, for generations. Screw you. I'm taking it because that's what I've always done. That's what my grandfather did and what his grandfather did before him. We'll just take it from you. And who's going to stop us? Nobody, because the courts are on our side. And it's got to stop. And that's where I turn to the Prime Minister to show the example of say, no, this has to stop. And it's something like this is the repercussions is this stuff happens now, and we need to fix it now and figure out a path forward to reconcile, because these disputes are not going to go away.
Yeah. Only the federal government can do this. And, if Trudeau is ever going to overcome the reputation, which may be fair, maybe not, I'm not passing comment right now, but the reputation that certainly some people hold as a kind of a lightweight who's all talk and no action, then this is where the rubber meets the road. You cannot brush this one under the carpet and think it's going to go away. It can only be the federal government that deals with it. It can only be the Prime Minister who can be at the forefront of it. Don't pass it off on bloody, what's her name, Bennett. The Prime Minister has to be involved front and center on doing this if he's really not bullshitting us all through the last 2-3 elections about Truth and Reconciliation. And I know the government's done good stuff and has spent money and all this stuff, but ultimately, every day that the Prime Minister is not there in the forefront, taking the bull by the horns, sitting down with the First Nations of Canada, it's a day wasted, and it's a day that you're not properly dealing with this. And I mean, it is absolutely shameful that he did that on such an important day. It's crass, it's stupid, it's unnecessary. Blame an advisor if you want, but the Prime Minister should have his head screwed on well enough to know that was just boneheaded and bad.
Well, let's go on to our third story.
Talking of boneheaded and bad.
Speaking of boneheaded and bad, great. That's our segue line. We go up the highway back to Hamilton, and over to McMaster University, because the kids are not all right. That was my tagline. Yeah. So if you lived in Hamilton, probably if you didn't, you probably would have noticed that on this weekend there was an unsanctioned homecoming party in the neighborhood surrounding McMaster, which led to a lot of property damage, a lot of not social distancing being held, and just general chaos and rowdiness, that to the point where the city of Hamilton kind of had to give a stern talking to the university governance body to say, basically, get your kids in order. That's a kind of I'm going to say it's a bit of a striking tone, considering that Hamilton's actually pretty friendly with McMaster. Like Hamilton is very much a pro-university town, and they love McMaster. So for the city council and the city governance to kind of come in and say, get your act together, is quite telling.
It is. I mean, I guess the university authorities would say that, well, wasn't us, Gov, but I don't know. There's only so far you can take that. I mean, I think the pictures speak for themselves. Anybody who hasn't seen them, there's a picture of a car was overturned and, surrounded by garbage, and there were videos of students sort of laughing and cheering, quite a big crowd. I mean, they say 5,000, it looked at least that, but it's I mean, obviously we've had like a really bad kind of back to school period in Ontario this year.
Well, you can say that that's putting it mildly. I mean, if you want to go through the list of transgressions, there was an incident, if I'm not mistaken, in Kingston a little while back of similar partying from Queen's students. And then, of course, during orientation week, O week in London, you had the social media stories of mass sexual assaults happening across, or not across, but at a camp, at a residence at Western, at the University of Western. Now, I should clarify that London police says there's no evidence to substantiate those claims or those stories. It's not to say that they didn't happen, but it is to say that there's no evidence to say that they did, which are two very different things when you get down to the legalities of it. But the simple fact is, there was clearly something happened at Western that was not something that Western should be proud of. And this is clearly,
sorry, carry on, Joe.
I was just going to say, and that kind of translated down the road to McMaster, where, I mean, this is not something that, I mean, it's not as serious as mass sexual assault. I'm not comparing it to that, but still, nonetheless, it's behavior that you don't want associated with your school or with your alma mater if you're an alumni.
I mean, I guess. I mean, I was just looking at that. There's also been reports at Wilfrid Laurier. So we've got Queen's, Wilfrid Laurier. There was a sort of illegal gathering of 1,000 people. They're talking about expulsions there. Also at Guelph, I believe. I'm trying to remember, and forgive me for blanking, but I think there were rumors of sexual assault at Guelph as well, which is, that's a whole other level of awful and troubling. I mean, I think there may be multiple processes. I'm not going to go
there's multiple processes
going on, and that I think that there's the thing of sort of students finally getting back together after kind of a year away and going crazy, and that's
the thing. I'm not going. Like I was going to say, I'm not going to psychoanalyze 5,000 students in terms of what made, but it's clear if you think about it, like some of these kids have never been to university before. They missed out on the first year because of COVID last year. They were, instead of going off to university and kind of, experiencing that life away from home, that independence and making friends and the ups and downs of all of that, as one should. Instead, they got to stay home with mom and dad for another year. When if you think about it, like you're mentally building yourself up for a year, that final year of high school, you're waiting to go out, and then the pandemic hits, and you're told, nope, stay at home, learn all your courses. There's courses that you're looking forward to taking. You're doing it from your bedroom on a laptop instead. And so I get the pent up frustration, but man, oh man, this is not the way to do it. And all I can say, I wonder if the universities should have been better prepared or better expected. Like, there's like, what do you expect? Like, you have 2 years of kids itching to get out on their own. A lot of pent up anger. Just, you could have anticipated a little bit more. And
you know what? It's not like this hasn't happened before. I mean, I think there have been, excessively rowdy events at McMaster pre-COVID. Certainly were, I know for a fact, at Queen's, it was an annual, basically an annual riot that was not tolerated, but accepted. And this isn't good enough anymore. I mean, God knows, when I was a student, I was a jerk. I mean,
okay, yeah, but
I put that on the record.
Here's the big difference, though. Here in Ontario, the age at which somebody graduates high school and goes on to university is 17, thereabouts. I'm giving an average there. mean, when I went to university, I was twice that age. I was 19. By the time I went to university, I was old enough to drink. I was able to buy my own beer. So the idea of going away and, partying all the time didn't really, you had the freedom, but the novelty had kind of worn off. These kids still aren't able to legally buy alcohol. They're still not legally allowed to vote yet in some cases. And then we send them off in some cases across the province. They're not next door. They are hours away from home on their own in cities they're not familiar with. What do you like? It's kind of a recipe for a bit of a Lord of the Flies scenario, if you will. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing is that, maybe the universities just haven't prepared themselves properly for ingratiating these kids and giving them the tools to properly educate themselves on the responsibilities of living on your own. I should say also realize I just sound like my dad with that last statement.
There is that, but I think there were things that were acceptable when I was young that should not have been acceptable. And those things which were tolerated more than they should have been particularly amongst white middle-class students who are going on, well, they've got futures ahead of them, so let's not be too hard on them there. We can't be like that anymore. Again, replace those 5,000 mainly white, mainly fairly middle-class students with 5,000 black people or homeless people, and suddenly you've got a very different police presence there. And I hate going down this road, but it's true. We've been seeing that happening in Toronto, that the police action against homeless people has been really extremely heavy-handed as far as I can see. And that kind of equity of how you treat different people in different contexts is something that needs to be addressed as well. And yeah, it sucks to be a student in 2021 when you simply cannot get away with the kind of nonsense that I got away with 30 years ago. But I shouldn't have been able to get away with it then. So that's, apart from falling over and waking up with a hangover, I wasn't that bad.
I wonder, I'm wondering if 2021 is going to see the ending of a lot of these rituals and cultures. Orientation week, I can imagine it will change drastically next year, just based on what happened at Western alone. I hope it does. I hope that there's more emphasis on education and orientation, not on partying. And that, I would kudos to any school, post-secondary school in Ontario that steps up and says, no, we're not going to wait for us to become the next Western. We're gonna nip this in the bud now and figure out. We have a year to figure it out for next year's class.
And goodness knows, it doesn't rule out new students having all kinds of a good time, but you can't be turning cars over, guys, and you sure as hell cannot be, assaulting people.
No,
it's just obviously I'm just saying what's completely patently bloody obvious, but it can't go on. Well, that takes us to well past 30 minutes actually. So thanks everybody who has been listening today. We'll be back on Thursday with another episode of the 905er podcast. Until then, goodbye.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns, or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.